This video is the 5th of 7 baby quilts in this series, called Dragon Star for Grandbaby. The other quilts are for my cousin's babies, but this one is for my very own grandbaby. This is my second grandbaby, and they have 2 cousins, and each of those little ones has a quilt in the warm dragon colors. A star, a swirl, and steps. The Dragon Star pattern is adapted from a much larger pattern that I made for my daughter's wedding. I enjoyed making the center medallion, so I repeated that. My color palette is bright reds, oranges, and yellows, those warm dragon colors. One of the best things about having a pattern is I can just follow it, from cutting the correct size of each color to the construction. First step was making a bunch of half-square triangles. I sewed 2 lines down a diagonal of a square. I do use a sewing guideline because they help me with accuracy. Then I cut down the center and press open and square up. Now it's time to sew the center star. I press the seams opposite of each other, so hopefully the corners will meet. After the quarters were sewn together, I trimmed them to square and to a consistent size. Center star sewn together, and now with its border. The next row is flying geese. Once again, I'm grateful to follow a pattern, so I know I'll have the correct number and that they will fit around the star block perfectly. To make flying geese, I like to sew 2 smaller background squares to the larger colored square. Then I cut these apart, similar to how half-square triangles are constructed. Press them open and flat, then sew another background square on the top, and then cut apart and press. Voila! There's your flying geese block. Now I go back and trim it to square and to size. To sew them in their strips, I lay them out so I know I'm keeping the colors in order. It's very satisfying when they fit. Next are the big triangles that will set the center star and flying geese medallion on point. This is where I didn't have a pattern and had to make my own calculations to make sure the corner triangles would fit. I had to call my math teacher daughter to help me walk through the Pythagorean theorem. I made a block with a 1-inch red border with the intention to cut it into 2 triangles. The diagonal will end up on the bias, or the stretchy part of the fabric, and I didn't want the triangle to stretch out of shape, so I put 2 rows of stay stitching along where I was going to cut. It's rare for me to use pins except in basting, but I wanted to be sure the center of the triangle would fall in the middle of the medallion block. At the edge, where the outside triangles overlapped, I sewed one on top of another. And the quilt top is done. Time to make the quilt sandwich. I layered the back, batting, and top, then pinned the 3 layers together. Now on to the quilting. First, I laid down my straight anchor lines with my walking foot. Then switched over to my free motion foot, around the triangle, and loop down the center. Here, I'm auditioning borders. I tried the tall skinny loops and really didn't like them, so I picked them out and went with a candy ribbon. Managing the quilt bulk is always part of the process. Now for the large white triangles that set the center square on point. I decided on fanning lines out from the center, then I filled the spaces with a wave. For the outer border, I divided it in half with my double feed walking foot and guide. Loops on the little red border. The first part of the border is filled with half moons. and then more candy ribbons on the outer part. Square it up and add a red binding, and Dragon Star for Grandbaby is done. My next quilt is Feathered Friends for Jamie.